bring you security. Now the security itself must also be safe. So we have to have safety and security for the security that's supposed to keep us safe from the terrorists. Really, really strange moment we're at. I hope we can all just reflect on how paradoxical and nonsensical it is to keep our security safe now. At any rate, we will turn now to our quote of the day because we're facing such a police state presence in our country. We're being occupied. Our Constitution's trampled upon. So are the people. Well, have they warned about this? Yes. People saw this coming. One of them was General Douglas MacArthur, the famous American hero, and he wrote, quote, "I'm concerned for the security of our great nation, not so much because of the threat from without, but because of the insidious forces working from within." And you better believe that's true. You can look at any area you want, but TSA and these phony sham elections are a pretty good place to start. Furthermore, we have an update from the Marine who was kidnapped over his Facebook post talking about things like Bilderberg and 9/11 truth and how he was concerned about the destruction of the Constitution and the executive orders going on and thrown into a psych ward. Well, he's made his first public comments since being released after the judge acknowledged the fact they really had no factual basis to hold him on and that he's really just being persecuted and literally threatened with being brainwashed. Very alarming stuff. In his first public comments since being kidnapped by authorities over his political post on Facebook, former Marine Brandon Robb tells John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute that he is scared for his country. His case went viral on the internet earlier this month when on August 16th, the former Iraq and Afghanistan veteran was kidnapped from his home by police, FBI, and Secret Service agents and forcibly incarcerated. Let's take a look at some of the things he had to say.
I go back again. You've served your country well. You're a businessman. You're an upstanding person in your community. How did this impact you physically and even mentally? Let's put it that way. Being put in a facility like that.
You know, I'm pretty tough, so I roll with the punches. But it made me scared for my country. The idea that a man can be snatched off of out of his property without being read his rights, I think should be very extremely alarming to all Americans.
Well, you know, as we found out in this case, there are 20,000 of these civil commitments in Virginia alone, hundreds of thousands across the United States where people are being picked up. In your own county, I was told by a reporter, just in the month of August, and it hadn't been completed yet, the month hadn't run its course, there were 20 people who had disappeared in your own county like this.
I heard that as well.
So that's scary. It's frightening. This is, like you said, Orwell. It's like out of Orwell's books, Philip K. Dick books, science fiction. So maybe what we're saying here is, and maybe correct me if you think I'm wrong, that fiction's become fact. We're living in an Orwellian society. What do you think?
Well, I can give you a perfect example that that's true. If you read 1984, George Orwell, in that society, there was something called the Ministry of Truth. Bill Clinton very recently went on record and said that he believed there should be a ministry of truth in this country to monitor the content of the internet.
And it goes on from there, but certainly it is Orwellian. Probably among Brandon Robb's biggest offenses is the fact that he can read. Maybe he hasn't taken enough of his medication. We're getting to those stories in just a moment. But I also want to read this quote that he said, "The truth is very powerful and has the ability to cut. The truth is not always nice." He further pointed out that Jesus probably would have also been investigated as a terrorist for encouraging his followers to sell their cloaks and buy a sword. And if that isn't true, I don't know what is. The whole point is they tried to distort his words and make a case about him just to go after him. And they're doing this not just against this individual, that would be a big enough story, but to all kinds of veterans. They're supposed to be heroes when they go over and fight imaginary terrorists and get put in the meat grinder. But when they come home, they're a threat to the natural order of things because we're under a dictatorial takeover. And that's why they're persecuting numerous veterans. This John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute has documented other cases, and I'm sure he's going to be coming forward with that information. Not sure if we're getting him on the show, but we're looking at that. Now, in health and technology news, which are merging more and more, a pill that treats and tells. better put, a tattletale pill. And these, you've probably heard about these. They've been reported on since at least January. Edible microchips to alert mobile phones of pills not taken, digital digestible pills that will allow doctors to monitor your medication use. And now they're pushing for them more than ever. Doctors are saying they want their patients to be forced to take these. Doctors who've already been brainwashed and financially bought off by the big pharmaceutical companies are now being encouraged for that little idea of compliance, to make sure their patients aren't just getting the diagnosis and paying the money for the pills, but that they're actually taking them and having their physiology and brain waves rewritten by these wonderful little pills they have. At any rate, if you're having trouble remembering whether you took your pills on time, your medicine may soon have the answer for you. Pills from everything from the common cold to diabetes or cancer can be embedded with tiny ingestible chips that track whether a patient is taking their medication on time. And it goes on to detail the California-based Proteus digital health firm. And they say, well, some patients may not like being tracked. Some patients may think it's Big Brother, but it's a good idea, and it doesn't mean you're a bad patient. It's just that we want to have accurate data and make sure you're fully medicated, just like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. And I've got a separate ad for a different firm. I hope you can pick this up on the document cam. This is from the Daysalt Systems, and they've got a similar nanotech pill that's going to help keep track of your medication. And it says, in the future, if we want to avoid surgery, can we swallow a robot? And this, again, is stuff that Ray Kurzweil and others talked about, where nanobots are going to be injected into our body. They're going to take care of the medical aspects. Natural cures, of course, will long since be banned by the time that we see these nanobots taking over and really telling us what's best. But what I found in this article that was the most interesting is this is yet another cockamamie idea promoted and funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, now by far the largest philanthropy interest in the world. The Rockefeller Foundation, among others, merged most of their main issues with the Gates Foundation, who focus exclusively, well, I shouldn't say exclusively, they focus predominantly on vaccines around the globe and GMO foods and all kinds of other things that are really strange ideas, like clouding the earth with barium and sulfur particles to change our weather patterns. And by the way, he owns hurricane steering technology. Huge conflicts of interest. Nobody seems willing to hold these so-called philanthropy foundations to account because they have a friendly face, Bill and Melinda Gates in a blue sweater. And they've given money to Proteus, and they've worked with the other nanotech and technology firms, the big pharma firms, the firms in China and Japan, it tells us, the Swiss firm Novartis. All these big pharma entities are being told to adopt and push this technology, a digital pill, the beginning of introducing RFID chips into our body to track what's going on in there. And that's all just a lead up for what you know has been coming, what you know has been on the agenda for decades, the implantable permanent RFID chip they hope they could put under the skin in your hand or maybe somewhere else on the body. But meanwhile, the Gates Foundation hasn't stopped there. They're in the news for other items today, other equally dangerous, perhaps more dangerous proposals. They're funding a variety of proposals listed here on their website, among them an anti-vaccine surveillance and alert system to counter disinformation, supposedly, disinformation, according to them, about vaccines and their well-known dangers, and to alert authorities that they need to basically monitor people putting out this information. But even more radical, the Bill Gates Foundation is funding and developing and preparing to deploy unmanned aerial vehicles to take vaccines to your home if you're in a rural area. So those who don't comply, who don't volunteer for what they consider mandatory vaccines, will get little home visits from robots. So it's not just the robots and the pills you take, it's going to be the drones showing up your house literally with vaccines, and who knows how things go from there. But they're planning to try to push for universal vaccine adoption, and as usual, they have another dozen or so vaccine-related proposals as they try to pursue total world by vaccination. Who nominated this guy to run the world? Well, his money did, the money he stole from you through his dominance in Microsoft. But what's important about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is their little proposals, their little grants get adopted by individual nations, and they fund maybe the first round just to get the doors open. Then they saddle those nations with a huge burden and cost of running those vaccine programs. There's a big controversy in places like India and Pakistan where A, they're suspicious of all this Western intervention, and B, you have 47,000 cases of polio admittedly caused by the oral polio vaccines. That's just a taste of the problems that this maniacal mad scientist is creating across the earth. As I might mention, he continues to push GMOs everywhere. Remember his crazy proposal to spend more than $1 million developing the galvanic mood bracelets that he would make students and teachers wear in the classroom to try to monitor whether or not they're paying attention to the indoctrination lesson handed down from the global government? Well, that's just the kind of big technocratic stuff they want to run our lives with. This is the stuff the classic socialists who have taken over this world through the collectivist model have been talking about since the early 1900s. People like George Bernard Shaw, who said under socialism you'll be forcibly fed, clothed, taught, whether you like it or not. And if you're not deemed worthy, if you don't have the character, according to George Bernard Shaw, the big Fabian socialist, you'll be executed. Then you've got people like Carol Quigley. Then you have people like Carol Quigley who were insiders in those Cecil Rhodes roundtable groups who, again, were pushing for collectivism in the different Western nations across the planet and the other developing world nations. And he talked about how there's no more political freedom, how the left and right is all an illusion, but then specifically how you're going to be numbered from birth to death, tracked through your military and education records, and all the way down to your retirement benefits and then to your death itself. They're going to control your life literally from cradle to grave. And it talks about how the experts are going to rule us instead of the people, instead of the popular will, instead of anything that even remotely resembles a democratic process. But look how updated this is in the 21st century with people like Bill Gates, big technocrats trying to tell us how it is, trying to tell us how to run our lives, trying to tell us we're not supposed to use water or energy and that we need to cut our population. And now he wants to use these high-tech gadgets to make sure the vaccines and big pharma medication is taken. That's the socialist collectivist model they've got us all to adopt. And it doesn't have anything just to do with socialist sentiment. This has to do with big state governments. It's the same thing for the capitalist branded stuff. It's the same thing for the fascist branded countries. Nazism was National Socialism, another brand of the same thing. It's tyranny. It's tyranny, people, and Bill Gates is part of it. I wholeheartedly reject these proposals. They really make me uneasy. Meanwhile, in food and natural news information, we have the corrupt Indian politicians who've been accused of stealing more than $14.5 billion in food that was specifically designated for the many starving poor in India. Apparently, corrupt Indian politicians have successfully stolen more than $14.5 billion worth of food from poverty-stricken citizens, looting over 57,000 tons of food intended for the starving poor. These corrupt lawmakers and politicians have put into warehouse massive amounts of food supplies that they're holding for purposes unknown. Now, Naresh Saxena, a Supreme Court commissioner there in India, called this the most mean-spirited, ruthlessly executed corruption because it hits the poorest and most vulnerable in society. What I find even more shocking, she says, is the lacking willingness in trying to stop it. And all this warehousing of food, controlling of the food supply, not only is it part of totally historical tyranny, just as we saw in places like the French Revolution, just been reading about that, that's why it's on my mind, but this is at a time where we have a drought. Who knows what all are the major causes behind one of the biggest droughts we've ever seen, but it's crimping on the food supply. We've got these crazy carbon policies where they're growing corn for ethanol for fuel production rather than for food, all this cutting into it as there's finally, for the first time, a debate over speculating on commodities, in particular food, which really gives a financial incentive to do just what they've done with this poor food stock in